After the funeral of my father, a highly respected major shareholder in the company, our family convened to discuss the inheritance. In the meeting, my brother-in-law, Jason, unexpectedly asserted his opinion. He argued fervently that my wife, Emily, the eldest daughter, should inherit the stocks and a total of $5 million. Witnessing my brother-in-law and sister eagerly anticipating a substantial windfall, the lawyer calmly interjected with a hint of surprise. As the lawyer explained, Emily legally had no claim to the inheritance. My name is John, a 42-year-old salaried worker living with my beloved wife and 2 children. Despite my father's impressive reputation, my elder sister, Emily, has long been a source of concern for our parents due to her recurring problematic behaviors. She struggled to establish a stable career and led a self-centered life, causing me to distance myself. Over time, my discomfort grew, particularly when Emily, at the age of 50, abruptly brought home a much younger man named Alex and announced her intention to marry him. Despite Alex's attractive appearance, he exuded an irresponsible air that did not sit well with me. Emily shamelessly sought wedding funds from our father, quickly squandering them. Her audacious demand for more funds further distressed our father, who faced health issues. Eventually, our father succumbed to an illness, leaving us grieving his sudden demise. I took charge of the funeral arrangements while my sister, true to form, distanced herself and refused to contribute. In the aftermath of the funeral, as my mother and I were still grappling with our grief, the lawyer arrived to discuss the inheritance. To our surprise, Jason and Emily barged into the discussion, claiming that Emily, as the eldest daughter, was entitled to the stocks and a $5 million inheritance. Jason's triumphant demeanor shocked us, and he boldly asserted that we should not think about using the funds as we pleased. Both my mother and I were bewildered, having been unaware of the will left by our father. As Jason reveled in the prospect of newfound wealth, Emily, dissatisfied, questioned the lawyer's statement. However, the lawyer clarified that Emily had no legal right to the inheritance. This revelation left both my sister and brother-in-law with astonished expressions. Emily, displaying her anger, raised her voice, insisting that it was impossible. The lawyer further disclosed that Emily was not the biological daughter of the deceased. Emily turned to our mother with an intense gaze, seeking confirmation. At that moment, my mother wore a complex expression, seemingly unable to find the words to address the shocking revelation. I had always been aware that Emily and our father were not biologically related, but it appeared she was completely oblivious to this fact. Confused, Emily began shaking our mother's shoulders, pleading desperately, "Mom, what does this mean?" Unperturbed by the shaking, my mother calmly yet firmly revealed, "Emily, you are the daughter of my previous husband." While being shaken, my mother quietly disclosed this significant fact. Emily, who had always asserted that our dad loved her the most, now wore a face of utter disbelief. Suddenly, Jason interjected. "But if there was an adoption, she would have rights to the inheritance, right? That's correct, isn't it, Emily?" He sought confirmation from my sister, who hesitantly agreed, saying, "Yes, that should be the case." However, in front of Emily, our mother slowly shook her head, saying, "No. Emily, we never went through an adoption." Emily, shaking with anger, cried out, "How could this be? I am the rightful eldest daughter of this family. Dad even said so," glaring at me with rage. In a trembling voice, Emily continued, "Why do you get to monopolize our family's wealth?" Her words sparked my anger, and I retorted, "Have you ever thought about how much you made Dad spend? You still have something to say," I said indignantly. "Shut up. I am the daughter of this house. I have every right to it," Emily insisted. I replied, "Exactly. Spending money on a daughter is a parent's duty." I was appalled by the situation and let out a deep sigh. Normally, spending money on a daughter isn't wrong, but the issue was the amount my sister made Dad spend on her debts and compensations. The lawyer, who had been observing quietly, spoke up. How about we let Emily see the will too? Emily was clueless about the will, and when I pointed out that Dad wanted to discuss its contents with the whole family, she had neglected it and went out for other errands. Jason couldn't hide his anger and glared at Emily, asking, "Why did you do that, Emily?" It was important. At the lawyer's suggestion, my sister and brother-in-law agreed to hear the will. The lawyer then read aloud Dad's will, which clearly named my mother and me as the sole inheritors of the entire estate. The will detailed specific reasons why Emily was not legally adopted. It seemed Dad initially intended to accept Emily as a formal family member. However, the will meticulously described his disappointment in her mean actions towards me since childhood and her escalating wastefulness as she grew older. Emily was shocked and lost for words, confronted with the reality of having no inheritance rights. "What does this mean, Emily? Were you deceiving me, making me believe we'd become rich?" I asked. Left behind, Emily glared at us with a face full of anger, questioning my mother. "Why didn't you adopt me? Why does Mom get the inheritance?" I had always been aware that Emily and our father were not biologically related, but it appeared that she was completely oblivious to this fact. Confused, Emily began shaking our mother's shoulders, pleading in a desperate voice, "Mom, what does this mean?" Unperturbed by the shaking, my mother calmly yet firmly replied, "Emily, you are the daughter of my previous husband." While being shaken, she quietly disclosed this significant fact. Emily, who had always taunted me with claims that Dad loved her the most, now wore a face of utter disbelief. Suddenly, Jason interjected, "But if there was an adoption, she would have rights to the inheritance, right?" "That's correct, isn't it, Emily?" Seeking confirmation from my sister. "Yes, that should be the case," Emily replied. However, in front of Emily, our mother slowly shook her head. "No, Emily, we never went through an adoption." Shocked by this revelation, Emily turned to our mother, demanding an explanation. At that moment, my mother wore a complex expression, seemingly unable to find the words to address the shocking disclosure. "I should have rights too. It's unfair because of Mom's lack of action," Emily exclaimed, her cries filled with frustration. My mother, struggling to find words, managed to say, "Well, that is why." "Why deviate everything? Why nothing for me?" Emily shouted angrily, her disheveled hair emphasizing her intense emotions. The lawyer, however, remained calm, as if it were a normal day. As soon as I asserted my biological connection with Dad, Emily, in a fit of rage, reached out to hit me, expressing that it would have been better if I never existed. Before I could respond, the lawyer intervened, warning Emily to refrain from such actions, threatening to involve the police. About half a year later, the inheritance process was smoothly completed. Emily and Jason initially resisted strongly, but the lawyer's skillful handling left them with little room to interfere. My mother eventually provided Emily with a small amount of money, though it wasn't my place to comment on it. Frustratingly, Emily and Jason disappeared without a trace, leaving our relatives in shock and disappointment due to their blatant greed for money. One day, my wife suggested taking my mother and daughter out for a pleasant meal. Despite my proposal for my mother to live with us, she hesitated, torn by the irreplaceable bond with Emily. Understanding her concerns, I gave my mother some time to think. As I drove her home, we were surprised to see lights on at the usually empty house. Cautiously parking the car in the garage, we approached the entrance, suspecting Emily might have returned. Suddenly, a car rushed towards us, and my daughter yelled, "Watch out!" Instinctively, I threw myself to protect my wife, barely avoiding the car. Though I groaned in pain after being grazed by the car, my wife, worried, asked if I was okay. The car, driven by Jason, eventually crashed into the garage entrance. During my overnight stay at the hospital, Emily visited with my mother. While my mother tended to flowers, Emily looked at me and remarked, "You're surprisingly tough, aren't you?" Her tone carried a hint of disappointment. I pondered to myself, confirming my suspicions, and provocatively responded that if I had perished in the accident, Mom would have inherited everything. Disappointed by my words, Emily looked visibly uneasy. I know what you were expecting. I continued as Emily averted her eyes, looking down. But you see, Mom intends to renounce her inheritance, so your hopes won't come to fruition. As I uttered this, Emily stared back at me in astonishment. It seemed unfathomable to her that someone would willingly relinquish what they could receive. I have a wife and kids, so Mom says the inheritance should go to them. That's what a parent should do, I explained, anticipating Emily's objections. But Emily started to object, her words trailing off. I've made a will early, following Dad's example. Unfortunately, the inheritance that I should have will no longer go to Mom, I added. At these words, Emily shivered, unable to hide her agitation. Unable to conceal her anger, Emily raised her voice, demanding a share of the $5 million inheritance. When I firmly refused, Emily, filled with rage, grabbed my collar, insisting I should give her at least half since she was my real sister. Despite her loud pleas, I looked at her with sympathy. Such greed is what disappointed Dad. Don't you understand that? I spoke calmly. Emily's face rapidly turned red, and she reached for my throat. At that moment, my mother returned to the room and yelled at Emily, asking what she was doing. Hearing her shout, the nurses, summoned by the nurse call, escorted Emily out of the room. Though my mother seemed to try to protect Emily, she left, showering her with cold words. Where did I go wrong in raising her? My mother murmured in a pained voice. Soon after, we discovered that my mother had fallen ill. Pained by her weakening state, we started helping with transportation and housework. This, apparently, infuriated Emily, who probably heard it from our mother or encountered my wife when she came to ask for money. One day, out of the blue, Emily contacted me on my cell phone, stating that they would take care of Mom from now on, and I didn't need to come anymore. Confused, I asked her to explain the sudden decision, expressing deep concerns about leaving Mom's care to Emily, who could hardly manage household chores, let alone care for a sick person. I hurriedly called Mom to understand the situation, and surprisingly, I learned that Jason had caregiving experience, and Mom claimed her life wasn't much disrupted at the moment. I felt a sense of relief upon learning that, but soon after, Mom was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance due to a medication dosage mistake. The family hurried to the hospital, where we found Mom severely weakened. I asked my wife to stay with her and rushed to our family home. Upon arriving, I discovered the house in disarray. Mom couldn't prepare her favorite meals, the fridge was empty, and Emily had fired the helper without consulting anyone. Any expectations I had of Emily quickly turned to disappointment. Checking the safe, I found a significant amount of money had been withdrawn from Mom's bank account. Fortunately, the inheritance account was untouched, but the funds set aside for daily expenses were nearly depleted. Swiftly gathering necessary items such as bank books, cards, and seals, I returned to the hospital to explain everything to Mom and discuss our next steps. Emily, unaware of the bank book issue, was shocked, but her reaction darkened when I mentioned the medication mistake was something Jay had prepared. I suggested to Mom that it would be better not to let Emily into the house anymore, expressing my concerns about the house's terrible state and Mom's apparent weight loss. I warmly suggested that we live together in a new house. Mom burst into tears at these words, crying intensely. However, Mom's condition worsened, and despite the doctor's best efforts, she passed away heartbroken over Emily's actions. When I returned to the family home to prepare for Mom's funeral, I discovered that all the valuables were gone. It appeared that Emily and her financially struggling husband had taken them. Seeing the empty house filled me with shock and anger, and I resolved firmly to make things right. The day after Mom's funeral, I met with Emily and the lawyer at the law office to discuss the inheritance. Emily, filled with a sense of superiority, confidently declared her right to receive Mom's inheritance. Unable to contain my laughter at her misunderstanding, the lawyer solemnly announced, "Let's take a look at the will," and broke the seal. Emily's face drained of color when the contents revealed that she was not to inherit anything. Jason, showing his fury, demanded an explanation. What does that mean? She's her daughter. You can't trick us. Hand over the inheritance now. Jason, shaking with anger, pounded the table. I calmly questioned him. Jason, did you do something to Mom? I did no such thing, he retorted dismissively. Then why was the usual medication mistaken? I pressed, but Jason brushed it off, saying, That's irrelevant, John. It's impossible that I don't get any inheritance. What did you do? I can't pay the mortgage for my apartment now. Shocked by his words, I realized that Emily had been counting her chickens before they hatched. Even though she hadn't appeared immediately after hearing of our mother's death, Emily, unable to hide her desperation, pressed the lawyer, Is there really nothing? The lawyer sighed deeply and confirmed, Yes, the will is as it states. Explaining the legal aspects, he revealed that after deducting the amounts Emily had withdrawn and sold off without permission, the inheritance was practically non-existent. In reality, this situation was part of a plan I had discussed with the lawyer beforehand. Emily, astonished, protested vehemently, refusing to accept reality. She expressed her dissatisfaction, but I harbored strong resentment towards Emily, who only leeched off others without working. Just to take the money when Mom was delighted believing that Emily would take care of her. Caring for someone requires money. You wouldn't understand that, I lashed out. At my demand to see the expenditure details Emily had used for Mom, she trembled, realizing there were no receipts to acknowledge those claims. Jason tried to sway the situation in his favor, but I refused his request, openly admitting the mistreatment I had endured from Emily. I stated firmly, I'll be taking legal action regarding that accident. Taken aback, Jason turned pale, realizing his slip. I explained that we had gained consent for recording the meeting in advance. Emily cried out in agony, realizing the consequences of their actions. As a result, Jason faced legal consequences, and his past misconducts were uncovered, leading to his arrest. Though Emily appeared to be a minor accomplice, she faced financial troubles and rejection from relatives. Meanwhile, I continued my days of steady work, unshaken by the ordeal, and looked forward to small joys from stock dividends.